The wind cut across the barren plain like a whip, dragging with it the dry taste of dust and the bitter scent of a winter that hadn't yet arrived but was already in the air, and I could feel it deep in my bones as I stumbled along that dirt road, each step heavier than the last, my boots, if you could still call them boots, nothing more than cracked leather clinging to my feet out of pity, and the soles so thin I could feel the grit and sharp stones beneath with every weary stride. My coat was a patchwork of old burlap, frayed wool, and desperate stitching, none of it enough to keep out the cold, and my hat had been stolen 2 towns back by a man who said he'd shoot me if I didn't hand it over. Truth be told, I'd have given him anything he asked for because I had nothing worth dying over, not anymore. I hadn't eaten in 3 days except for half a biscuit I'd found in the gutter of a mining town, and even that had been covered in grit and tasted like the underside of a wagon wheel, but hunger doesn't have manners, it just takes what you give it. I must have looked like the very ghost of the desert itself, skin burnt from the sun, lips cracked, eyes squinting not from suspicion but from the simple pain of too much light and too little hope, and I knew the next town, if you could call it that, was miles away, the kind of place that didn't show on maps because no one cared if it lived or died, which made it the kind of place I might have a chance of not being noticed long enough to survive. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of sorrow, and my thoughts drifted between the men I used to be, someone who owned a fine horse, a silver pocket watch, and a name people spoke with respect, and the hollowed-out shell I'd become, the kind of man mothers pulled their children away from in the street. By the time the town's outline wavered into view, I'd nearly convinced myself it was a mirage, the way the buildings shimmered in the heat, but the smell of wood smoke and the faint metallic tang of worked iron told me it was real, and as I limped down its single dusty street, I could feel eyes on me from behind weathered curtains and half-open saloon doors. The place wasn't much, just a handful of wooden buildings leaning against each other like tired old men, but it was alive in a way I wasn't, and that alone gave me a strange sort of hope. I passed a general store where the proprietor pretended not to see me, a blacksmith whose hammer paused mid-swing before he went back to work, and a saloon where laughter died the moment I crossed its shadow. I kept my head down, not from shame but because I didn't have the strength to lift it anymore, until I saw him, standing outside a modest ranch house on the edge of town, leaning against the fence like he'd been waiting for something, or someone. He was a big man, shoulders broad under a worn duster, head pulled low against the sun, and when his eyes met mine they didn't carry the usual mix of fear and disgust I'd grown used to. They carried recognition, the kind of look a man gives when he's seen the same pit you're in and climbed out of it. I must have looked like death walking because all I could manage when I reached him was to mutter, "I'm dirty, poor, and barely alive," and instead of turning away, instead of telling me to keep moving like every other soul I'd met in the past year, he nodded slow and said, "So was I once. Come inside," and something in his voice told me it wasn't charity he was offering, but a lifeline, and though I didn't yet know his name, or why he'd help a man like me, my feet carried me through his gate, past the creak of the wood and the smell of hay, into a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time, and as the door closed behind us, shutting out the wind, I realized I might just have stepped into the first chapter of something worth living for again. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of coffee and wood smoke, a comfort so foreign to me now it almost made my knees give way, and the cowboy, whose name I would soon learn was Eli Mercer, moved with the kind of calm a man earns only after walking through storms most folks couldn't survive. He didn't ask questions right away, just slid a tin mug across the table toward me and filled it with coffee so black it looked like midnight in a cup, the steam curling up into my cracked face, and when I took that first sip it burned my tongue but filled me with a heat that made me remember I was still alive, still capable of feeling something besides hunger and cold. Eli sat across from me, hands folded, eyes steady, and after a long silence broken only by the pop of the fire, he said, "You been running from something," not as a question but as a statement, like a man reading a sign nailed to my chest, and I wanted to deny it, but my voice was too tired for lies, so I told him bits and pieces, the outlaw gang I'd once ridden with, the job gone wrong, the friend I'd left bleeding in the dust, the bounty hunters who'd chased me across 3 territories, and the slow erosion of my will until I was nothing but a man-shaped shadow. Eli listened without flinching, just nodding sometimes, and when I finished, he said, "You're in luck, because I got a few shadows of my own, and some of 'em are meaner than yours," and before I could ask what he meant, a sharp knock came at the door. 3 raps, deliberate, heavy, and Eli's eyes narrowed in a way that told me this wasn't a welcome visitor. He stood, took down a rifle from above the mantel, and motioned for me to stay put, but something in my gut told me this was about me, and when he opened the door, the cold rushed in along with 2 men in long coats and dust-covered boots, their badges catching the firelight just enough for me to see the glint of authority, lawmen, but the kind whose morals were as worn as their saddlebags. "We're looking for a man," the taller one said, his voice like dry gravel, "dirty, poor, barely alive. Matches a description we've been carrying, and his eyes drifted past Eli toward me, recognition flaring, and I knew my time here might already be up, but Eli stepped between us, his voice steady as a steel trap, saying, "Ain't no such man here," and when they tried to push past him, he planted himself like an oak tree, the rifle casual in his grip but with a promise of thunder behind it. The standoff was brief but tense, the air thick enough to chew, until the lawman spat in the dirt, muttered something about checking the saloon, and left, their boots crunching away into the night. Eli closed the door, locked it, then turned to me with a look that was half warning, half invitation, and said, "If they're hunting you, they'll be back, and they won't be alone next time. You can keep running like you've been, or you can stand your ground here with me. Your call." The fire popped again, like it was waiting for my answer, and something in me, something I thought had died out in the desert, stirred back to life, the part of me that remembered how to fight, how to survive, how to matter. I told him I'd stay, and Eli's mouth twitched like maybe it was a smile, though it was hard to tell under the shadow of his hat. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months, the sound of the wind outside less a threat and more a reminder that I had walls, a roof, and someone willing to stand in front of me when trouble came. But deep down I knew the peace wouldn't last, not with the kind of men chasing me, not with whatever ghosts Eli kept locked behind his own steady eyes. And sure enough, when the sun rose, it brought more than light. It brought the faint dust cloud of riders on the horizon, moving fast, the kind of fast that meant they weren't coming for coffee. Eli was already on the porch, rifle in hand, and when he saw me he said, "Looks like the past don't like to be left behind," and in that moment, I understood this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about both of us, two men with battered souls standing on the edge of something dangerous, maybe fatal, but worth facing if it meant not going back to the empty road. I stepped up beside him, felt the weight of the revolver he'd pressed into my palm earlier, and as the riders drew closer, I realized this was the first morning in a long time I wasn't thinking about running. I was thinking about the fight, about holding the line, about earning the second chance Eli had handed me without asking for a thing in return. And if I make it out of this alive, if either of us does, I'll tell the rest of this story, because stories like this aren't just about bullets and blood, they're about the stubborn ember of hope that refuses to go out no matter how cold the wind gets. If you've been listening this far, you already know some part of you believes in that ember too, so stick with me. Subscribe, keep your boots by the fire, because the next part of this tale is just getting started, and trust me, you're not gonna want to miss it.